My sister pointed her finger at me. The way you only point at someone you've already decided has done you wrong. She was standing on my property, in my driveway, with my parents behind her and my Aunt Yolanda beside them, and she was pointing at me like I owed her something. Before a single word came out of her mouth, I already knew why they had come. They had not come to talk. They had come because they expected me to hand something over. Before I get into everything that happened, do me a favor. Hit the like button and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. I'm genuinely curious how far this story travels. Now let me tell you what it cost me to protect what was mine. I'm 34 years old and I work as a licensed physical therapist at a regional hospital in Charlotte, North Carolina. I have worked there for 8 years. I did not come from money. My parents raised my sister Delphine and me in a 2-bedroom rental that my father kept with shift work at a distribution center. We were not poor, exactly, but there was never anything left over, and I understood early that if I wanted something, I would have to build a path to it entirely by myself. The duplex was that something. I started saving for a down payment at 26, the same year I passed my licensing exam. I opened a high-yield savings account and set up an automatic transfer the same week I received my first paycheck as a licensed therapist. I treated that transfer like a bill, fixed, non-negotiable, gone before I could decide to spend it on something else. I lived with 2 roommates until I was 30. I drove the same car for 7 years. I did not take a real vacation between 2017 and 2020. I brought lunch to work every single day in containers I washed and reused until the lids cracked. At family dinners, when people asked what I was putting money away for, I always gave the same answer. I want to own something that belongs to me. $44,000. That was the down payment. I signed the closing paperwork in September, 3 years ago, sitting across from a loan officer who walked me through each page with patience. My name appeared on the deed in 2 places, and only my name, because no one else had contributed $1 or an hour toward what I was purchasing. No cosigner. No family gift, no borrowed money from anyone. The loan officer said congratulations and shook my hand, and I sat in my car in the parking lot afterward and stared at the copy of the deed for a long time, not quite believing it was real yet. The duplex was a 2-unit property on a block I had driven past so many times I knew how the afternoon light hit the upper windows in late summer. It was not impressive from the outside. It needed work. I spent the entire first summer renovating the top unit myself. New floors, fresh paint throughout, a bathroom that had been leaking long enough to warp the subfloor underneath. I learned what I needed to learn from online videos and from getting things wrong the first time. The things I could not safely do myself, I hired licensed contractors to handle and paid them from my maintenance reserve. By October, the unit was clean and ready. I found a tenant through a property management app, a retired school teacher who paid every month without fail, and never asked me for anything I wasn't prepared to give. $1,450 a month, which covered the bulk of the mortgage. I lived in the bottom unit and managed the whole property from a spreadsheet I updated every quarter. Property taxes, maintenance reserves, projected vacancy. Every line had a number, every number had a source, and every source was me. My name was on the deed, my name was on the insurance policy. My name was on the property tax statements that arrived every January without exception. There was no shared ownership. There was no family arrangement made at a kitchen table that someone could later choose to reframe as a promise. The property was mine in every legal, financial, and practical sense, and the paper trail was thick enough to prove it without anyone's word being required. That paper trail should have made what came next impossible. It almost did not matter. The phone call that started everything came at 12:47 in the morning, on a Thursday in October. I had worked a long shift, come home exhausted, and fallen asleep before 9. When my phone lit up the room, I was in the deep part of sleep that's hardest to pull out of. The number was unfamiliar. The area code was from a county about 90 miles north of Charlotte. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me answer anyway. "Am I speaking with Miss Calloway?" a man asked. I asked who was calling. His name was Harmon Briggs. He said he operated a private lending firm. He apologized for the hour, said the matter was time-sensitive, and told me that my sister Delphine currently owed his company $41,000. I sat up in the dark and said nothing for a moment. He explained it the way someone describes a business transaction, without urgency, without apology, without any indication that he was delivering news that would keep me awake until dawn. Over the past 8 months, Delphine had borrowed from him in increments, each time guaranteeing repayment against her future income. She had made 3 payments and then stopped entirely. With fees and interest, the balance had grown. His firm had tried to reach her for 6 weeks. She was not responding to calls or messages. So they had looked at the documentation she had provided when she initially applied for the loan. "I don't have anything to do with my sister's finances," I said. "That's actually why I'm calling," he said, "because according to what we received, you do." He said they had been given a quitclaim deed indicating that my sister held a 50% ownership interest in a duplex at my address. I told him that was impossible. I told him my sister had no ownership in the property, had never had any ownership in it, had never co-signed anything related to it, and had certainly never had my permission to offer it as collateral for any loan she had taken out. He said the deed had been recorded with the county. He told me I had 28 days. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with the overhead light on, going over every document I could picture in my memory. I called Delphine. It rang until voicemail. I called again. Same result. I sent a text message that said, "Call me right now, this is serious." No response came. I was at the County Register of Deeds office when it opened the next morning. The clerk pulled the records for my address and handed me a printed stack of pages at the counter. I sat down at one of the public tables and went through them in order. The original deed was there, the mortgage was there, the property tax filings were there, and then there was something that had not been there the last time I had checked. 8 months earlier, when I had refinanced. A quitclaim deed filed 11 weeks prior. According to the document, I had transferred a 50% ownership interest in the duplex to my sister. I looked at the signature line. Someone had written my name there. I knew immediately that it was not my signature, the way you know your own handwriting before your brain has finished processing what your eyes are seeing. I have signed my name thousands of times, on medical intake forms, patient assessments, insurance paperwork, legal documents. The signature on that deed was close. Whoever had made it had worked carefully from some reference copy. But the connection between certain letters was subtly wrong, and a small upward mark at the end of my last name, that I make automatically, every single time, without thinking about it, was not there. I had never signed that deed. I had not been present for any transaction involving my sister and this property. I had not agreed to transfer anything to anyone. But the filing had been accepted by the county. The deed had been recorded. As far as the public record was concerned, my sister owned half of what I had spent 6 years building toward. I photographed every page before I left, the deed 3 times from different angles. In my car, I sat for a long time before I started driving. I thought about how my signature had ended up on a document I had never touched. Access was the central question. Whoever had forged this had needed a real example to work from, something with a clear enough copy to practice against. About 18 months earlier, I had left a folder of old property documents at my parents' house while I was reorganizing my home office. The folder had old bank statements, a copy of the original purchase agreement, several forms I had signed related to property insurance. All of it had my address on it. All of it had my signature. My sister had a key to my parents' house. She visited at least twice a week. That folder had sat there for months, in a house she could access any time she wanted, with no reason for anyone to look twice at her going through it. I called a real estate attorney that same morning. She went through the photographs at her desk and confirmed what I already believed. The deed had been recorded, and therefore carried legal weight until it was formally voided. She explained the process, a complaint filed with the county, a sworn declaration, and law enforcement involvement if I wanted criminal charges to follow. She told me the notarization would be a key point. If the notary's stamp on the deed was unregistered or improperly obtained, the document would fall apart faster. I filed the complaint that afternoon, and started assembling the documentation she needed. 2 days later, I was at my kitchen table going through papers when my upstairs tenant knocked on the interior stairwell door to tell me there were men outside looking at the building. I went to the front window. 2 men I had never seen were walking slowly along the side of the property. One of them was holding a clipboard and writing things down. I went out through the front door. The man with the clipboard looked up and told me calmly that they were there to conduct a property assessment on behalf of a private lending firm. He said the name of Harmon Briggs's company. He said they had authorization from the co-owner. "There is no co-owner," I said. I am the sole owner of this property, and you do not have my permission to be here. The deed you're relying on is forged and is currently under investigation by the county. You need to leave right now. He looked at me with the particular patience of someone who has been sent to make people uncomfortable, and has done it many times before. We have documentation, he said. I have more documentation than you do, I said. Leave. I'm calling the police if you're still on this property in 2 minutes. They left. As the man with the clipboard got into the car, he looked back and told me I should have a conversation with my sister before I made things harder than they needed to be. I stood in the driveway after they drove away and looked at the building. The front steps I had regrouted myself the previous spring, the window trim I had repainted in the fall, because the old coat had started to peel. This was not something that had been handed to me. Every hour of improvement I had made to this property had come out of my own time and my own savings. The idea that someone could send 2 strangers with clipboards to walk around it and make notes was not something I was going to allow to continue. I called my mother that night and asked if the family could meet the next evening. She said yes without asking why, which told me what I needed to know about how much she already understood. When I arrived, Delphine was already seated at the kitchen table. My parents were there, and Yolanda had come as well, positioned near the window like someone waiting to referee. Nobody was eating. Nobody was pretending this was casual. I sat across from my sister and told her I had pulled the county records, that I had seen the quitclaim deed, and that I had spoken to an attorney. I told her I knew about the $41,000 loan, and I knew about the men who had come to my property. Delphine said she hadn't had a choice. My father said everyone makes mistakes under pressure. My mother said family means showing up for each other when things get hard. No one denied the deed. Not one person at that table expressed any surprise at anything I said. They had all known. For how long I still do not know, and not one of them had called me. I had not been invited there to be told the truth. I had been invited there because they had already decided this would be the conversation, where I agreed to absorb what had been done to me and let it go. The way I had always let things go. The way they had always counted on me to do. I looked at each of them, then I got up and left. The next morning, before I had finished my first cup of coffee, I heard cars outside. I went to the window and counted 3 vehicles, my sister's sedan, my parents' car, and Yolanda's minivan, all arriving within minutes of each other, no call ahead, no warning. They had coordinated this. They had talked about it before getting in their cars, and decided together that a united front at my door was the approach most likely to work. I stepped out onto the porch. Delphine crossed the yard faster than the others. She pointed at me, the same gesture I described when I started this story, directed and certain, already performing the role of wronged party. You would really let this destroy the family over something that doesn't even affect your life? She said. I'm your sister. My father asked me to think about what I was doing. My mother said I had always been the one who found a way through. Yolanda stood slightly to one side and said nothing, which was somehow more exhausting than if she had spoken. I looked at my sister. I looked at my parents, then I looked at the driveway, at the building behind me, at the property that had my name on it and had always had only my name on it, and I thought about 6 years of automatic transfers and packed lunches, and resoled boots, and Saturday mornings on my knees, learning to lay tile. I thought about the retired teacher upstairs who had done absolutely nothing wrong and whose home was caught in the middle of this. I thought about the 28 days the lender had given me. I reached into my pocket and took out my phone. My sister said don't. Just the one word. Something underneath the performance finally showed through. Not guilt, exactly, but the specific fear of someone who has been running a calculation and realizes the numbers have stopped working in her favor. I called the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department non-emergency line. I gave the dispatcher my address. I told her I needed to report a fraudulent deed filing against my property, that I had documentation ready, and that the individual who had filed it was currently standing in my driveway. Delphine walked to the far end of the porch and stood there with her back to everyone. My father sat down heavily on the front step and looked at the ground. My mother wrapped her arms around herself and stared out at the street without speaking. Yolanda went and sat in her minivan. 2 officers arrived within 15 minutes. I handed over the folder I had been building since the morning after that first phone call. The photographs from the Register of Deeds, the sworn declaration, the attorney's written assessment of the signature discrepancy, a full written timeline from the midnight call through the men with the clipboard. One officer went through each item methodically while the other spoke with Delphine at the far end of the porch. When my mother stepped forward and began explaining that this was a family matter that could be resolved privately, the officer who was reviewing the documents stopped her. He was not unkind about it, but he was clear. "Filing a fraudulent deed is a felony in North Carolina, ma'am," he said. "The relationship between the parties doesn't change that." I watched my sister's face when he said the word felony. The version of her that had arrived at my house with prepared posture and a rehearsed argument came down all at once, like something that had been propped up finally losing its support. What was underneath was tired and smaller than anything she had shown me in years. I understood, in that moment, that she had known this was coming. She had been hoping I would back down before it arrived. I signed my statement on the hood of the patrol car while my family watched from the porch. That was 9 months ago. The investigation moved quickly once the paperwork was in the right hands. Within 6 weeks, the county confirmed that the notary stamp used on the quitclaim deed had been purchased online and was not registered to any licensed notary in North Carolina. The handwriting analysis completed as part of the investigation was consistent with forgery. The deed was declared void and removed from the public record. As far as the county was now concerned, the property had always had one owner, which was correct, because it had. My sister was charged with felony deed fraud and identity fraud. She entered a plea agreement that did not include prison time, but did include supervised probation, restitution payments, and a felony conviction that will follow her for the foreseeable future. She is paying back what she owes on a schedule the court set. Nobody stepped in to cover it for her. That part, I will admit, gave me more peace than I expected. Harmon Briggs and his lending operation were a separate matter. The Attorney General's office opened an investigation after it emerged that he had been running unlicensed lending across multiple counties and had used the threat of property collection to pressure borrowers who had no real legal exposure. Several of us had been pulled into similar situations through the same mechanism. I gave a statement as part of that investigation. The firm was eventually shut down. My relationship with my father is careful now. We speak occasionally. Neither of us has found the language for the heavier things yet, and I am not certain we will. My mother and I have not spoken since the morning she stood in my front yard and watched me call the police. She made a choice about whose side she stood on before she ever got into the car, and I have had to make my own choice about what I am willing to keep accepting. Those two choices do not currently coexist, and I have stopped waiting for that to change on its own. Yolanda sent me a long message 2 months later about forgiveness and family, and the importance of not letting anger close doors. I read it once. I did not write back. Forgiveness is something I work out privately, on my own time, and it does not require an audience or a deadline that someone else sets for me. My tenant upstairs renewed her lease for another year. The mortgage is current. The property taxes have been paid. I updated the insurance policy last spring and sat with the document for a moment when it came through, noticing, as I always do, that my name is the only one listed. Last fall, I installed a new deadbolt on the exterior gate and set a keypad code that only I have. Some people told me that was excessive. I do not think it was excessive. I think it was something I should have done years earlier, not because everyone I trusted was going to eventually betray me, but because what I built deserved to be protected from the beginning. And protecting things you've earned is not paranoia. It's just taking yourself seriously. The deed is 1 page. My name appears on it in 2 places. I keep a copy in a fireproof box and a scanned version in a secure folder. Sometimes when I am having a long week and the work feels relentless, I open that folder and look at it for a moment. Not because I need to be reminded that the property is mine, but because the document tells a true story in the plainest possible terms about what happens when you decide that what you have built is worth fighting for, even when fighting means standing on your own porch and making a phone call while your entire family watches. That deed still has 1 name on it. It will keep having 1 name on it. If this story meant something to you, leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done differently? I read every single one.